It is. Yeah, it's always a mixed feeling at the end of a semester. A little sad, but really, I think a lot of people agree with this. I certainly do. Is that I just need break. I need that break to be here. What's up, GLH? What's up, Mango Mutiny? Yeah, happy last day. Last stream. This is probably the last time the stream will be live. I'll be live on this channel for uh, 7 weeks, I guess. Yeah, Marcus, we did hit 60%. Love this class. Thanks, Jess. Do it small. Go to chat just to scare everyone. Don't scare them too much. On day one, my goal is usually to scare them. So you can help with that. Not my goal isn't to scare them, but my goal is to make sure that what they think the course is going to be is in line with reality of what the course is actually going to be. I don't like seeing so many students attempt the course and give up. I want them to know that, hey, if you're registered for this course, this is what you're up for. This is what you're about to do. So usually does end up scaring them. Not enough though, apparently. Yeah, just like Toldfish. Toldfish is always here, at least until 2 minutes into lecture. Then he's gone. So for those of you, I might mention this again just because I'm so mad at myself for it. But for those of you who did hang out to the end last time, I did render a cube. It does exist. I realized right when I shut down the stream that I never put the cube on stream. And for those of you who don't know, I was trying to render a cube. That was just my goal, render a cube on the screen. I only had 20 minutes to do it. I'm like, I'll try this, play with the 3D libraries. And I got it just in the nick of time before my meeting started. So I was all excited. I was giddy on stream. And chat must have been confused because there was no cube on screen. I never put it on screen. But I promise it was there, that existed. That's what I was so excited about, is that I had a cube show up. But what's up, Protege? What's up, I'm So Lost? Happy last day. I can't believe we made it here. This semester, I don't know about y'all, but this semester seemed to fly by. Like, it went by too fast. Like, it was hard to get a handle on the semester. And then all of a sudden the weeks were flying by. And then all of a sudden it was... And all of a sudden it's over. Bruno Simmons. I'll do a risky click today. What's up, Wi-Fi? RT Keenan, thanks. It is a nice cube. When will we receive the TA registration email? Do you mean applications? The applications are always at the end of spring. We'll send out emails. Oh, fun. All in the browser? That's pretty badass. Yeah, 5 frames per second. Do this in the browser is pretty impressive, though, even with 5 frames per second. I'm so lost. Is that something you built? It seems too advanced for that, but if there's some backstory for that, if that's like built by students. No gaming session today. Yeah, I had a dream that we would hit 90% and have the gaming, but hey, I did install Cyberpunk 2077 yesterday, so I haven't played it yet because it took hours to download and install. But I'll be playing it offline if that makes you feel better. Yeah, started off slow and then just flew by. It sounds about right. Yeah, the start of the semester, at least for me, is usually pretty slow, just because I have to get everything set up, and I'm just spending so much time on everything. Not that that goes away, but yeah, I don't know. You have to do a smaller, or I'm so lost about the source code. I don't know what that was. I'm so lost. Just dropped the link in chat. I don't have any backstory for you. Does your expansion objective have to pass the tests in Autolab? Not necessarily. If it passed the test, then you know you're getting credit. Like, I'm not going to say, you got credit in Autolab, but I don't know, there's this bug. I'm not going to do that. But if you don't pass Autolab and it's just like one test case, then you're at my mercy. I might waive that and give you credit anyway, but the easiest way to make sure you get credit is to finish it. Jesse's secret lecture question walkthrough 151. Let's do this. 1 minute in. Okay, so we want to solve this lecture question. This is by far the highest voted. Just in case somebody, like half the class voted in that time. With 21 votes, the second closest was 8 votes for 4-6, which would have been the second one if we hit 80% response. We're at 67% response rate for the forms, so just one lecture question spoiled today. No review session today. No gaming session. Of course, we didn't hit 90. I thought I hit some good incentives. I hoped we would get to at least 80, and I was pushing for 90. I was hoping that would happen, but some students I can't even get them to fill out a form. It's one of the frustrating things about this job, but I just don't even know what else to do. I sent out several emails, posts on Piazza. I get it if people, students haven't read Piazza in a while, but some students I just can't get to do anything. And then some of them will wonder why they're failing. And they're sending me panicked emails. Oh my goodness, I'm going to fail. You couldn't even fill out a form. I'm trying to give you answers. End of rant. I don't want to rant at all today. Let's have a fun last day. So let's solve this lecture question. We want to write a direct message server. For this lecture, I wrote a chat server. And then for your lecture question, you were asked to take the ideas, take what we did with the chat server, and add a DM feature to it, or build an entirely separate DM server as the way the lecture question's worded. I didn't silence my phone, and I'm getting a spam call. Shut up, phone. Oh, screw it. Whatever. So we want to write a DM server in similar vein to the chat server, except instead of broadcasting messages to every user, we want to send messages to a specific user. So a few things here. We want to set up the server in the way that we usually do. That's going to be boilerplate. And when I do this question, when I go into IntelliJ and do this question, I'm just going to cut and paste the boilerplate server code, the code that we just use in every server that we see. You can just take that from my code. What we want to add to that is listeners listening for a register message. This, again, is the same as the chat app, actually. But the big feature is listening for messages of type direct message, which is going to take JSON strings in this format. And when it receives a message, so this is a user saying, hey, I want to send a direct message with this text to this specific user. And when the server receives one of these direct messages, it's going to send a message of type direct message to that username in the to field, in the to part of this object. Send them a message, and only them, with the message, the actual text of that direct message, and label it as from this user. So when somebody receives a DM, they know exactly who sent them this DM. The last buy from Toldfish. Oh, man. Please. Oh, yeah, by the way, please do 546. I mean, I set out the incentives. I did talk about 4.6, I believe. Which one is 4.6? Graphs. Graph distance. Actually, I don't even think I talked about that. I don't even think it was voted for on Piazza for review. I think it was mentioned but got like 0 or 1 votes. So if that's not what the people want, it's not what I'm gonna do. If that could have been the one we're covering. So let's build this thing. Let's hop over to IntelliJ And I'm going to leave the lecture question up over here. If you see me looking over here, I'm referring to the question text again. And I'm actually going to do this through a brand new IntelliJ project. While I'm in here, let me just grab any server. This one looks fine. And I just need the server code. I'll redo my listeners for the question. So let me grab that code just while I'm in this one. And now let's go to mouse work with me. A brand new project that I started right before lecture. Properties. DM server. Okay, so you should be seeing the right window. So there's a brand new project that I started. It has no code in it. And I'm going to paste. Actually, I'm not going to paste. I have to create my package and a package named server. Write a class named DM server. I'm going to paste all my stuff. I should get tons of errors, which good, I do. DM server. And I'm going to go back to my examples repo and do what I recommend for all of these projects is copy my pom.xml. It's one step that I'm sure you all know by now. If you forget that one step, things don't work. You're not going to have the libraries that we need. So I'm going to paste that pom.xml. I'm going to check if Maven registered that. It did not. So I'm going to click this magnifying glass. I know you can't see the pop-up, but I'm searching for Maven. Add Maven projects. I'm going to select that pom.xml. And now I have Maven linked to my project. Now we get to watch all those errors go away, except these listeners, which I haven't implemented. So let's actually delete some of this stuff. And start building our listeners. So we have it set up. Hopefully I went through that pretty quick. Hopefully you're all able to get to this point, just getting the server up and running by using one of my examples that I gave in class. Now let's build the functionality for this lecture question. So we need a message of type register. Whenever we get a message of type register, it's going to contain a string, which is the username of this user. So I need to create a listener, which is going to react to messages of this type. I'm going to call it register listener because it's listening to register messages. This is going to, this is going to take a string. So I need a class of type register listener that I'm going to create. And that's when I'm going to create a new instance, a new object of type register listener here. And register listener has to extend data listener of the type that we're listening for, which is strings. Now when I do that, I'm going to get an error which says, hey, you're extending a class, which means you're inheriting behavior from this class. But this class has an abstract method, meaning a method that has no implementation. So when I extend data listener, I have to implement this onData method, which as one of its parameters takes the type parameter, t in this case. So it's going to give me an error. This is one case where I like using autocomplete. Just tell me which methods I still have to implement. And I can get the header from that class in my code. So I don't have to remember, oh, we take an ACK request and all this stuff. I'm just going to let IntelliJ do some of the work for me there. So now my goal is to implement this method. I have a client, which is a reference to the socket from which this message came from, and the actual data of that message. I know that I expect my data to be a username. So one thing I like to do is name my variables what they actually are. Since this listener is going to listen for messages of type register, which contains the username of the user who's registering, I'm going to rename my variable username just to make it really clear that, hey, this is handling a username in the message. And then I want to do something here. I'm going to leave that for a little bit later, after I get the rest of the setup for this lecture question. So I also have to listen for another message type, a message of type direct underscore message, direct underscore message. And I'm going to create a new listener that's going to listen for these DMs. I'm going to call it DM listener. I'm going to copy my code here. Why is that giving me a warning? Because of duplicate code. This, you know what, I'm going to call this data again. And now when I receive a message of type direct message, let me move this to the bottom since we're not really talking about this. When I receive a message of type direct message, so I can try to get all of this on the screen at once. Now I want to parse this as JSON. This is going to be a JSON string. Let me actually copy and paste this. Another thing that I like to do, personal thing that I like to do, when I'm parsing data in a specific format, I'll paste a sample of that data in that method, just so I always remember, okay, this data is going to be in this format. It has a to and a message with two strings that it's mapping to. So my goal is to parse this. I'm going to pull in my JSON library to parse it. Oh, Windows, that's right. Hey, my import's working there. To parse this string, so data, that's going to parse the JSON and turn it into a JS value. I'll name it something else. I'll name it message here. And now I want to get the values out of this. I know I have an object with keys to and message. So if I want to get the values out of this, I'm going to rename this DM actually, so I'm not reusing the name message. How are we going to take the final? So there's no standard final in this class. If you don't have all your learning objectives done by tonight. So by the way, today, hopefully you all know this, today is the last day for lecture questions that are all due at midnight. And then over the weekend, I'm going to process all the learning objective progress, see who finished the learning objectives and who hasn't. If you didn't finish the learning objectives, but you're close, I'll contact you. I'll send you an email with the exact details of what I need you to do in order to pass the class. If you've completed all 5 learning objectives, there's nothing for you to do for the final. The final is only for learning objectives, not for application objectives. Yeah, if you're one lecture question short, I'll look at what you submitted for that and I'll make a decision on how to proceed. But if you're one lecture question short, it's not like I'm just going to say, hey, you failed the class. So don't sweat it too much. Still try to get it done, of course. And if I see that effort and I see that you tried, I'll give you something, maybe a different lecture question. I might make up some new lecture questions for next week for people to do some makeups. So we want to get the values out of this thing. For that, we used this notation. Get me the value 2 as a string. So this is all from the JSON lecture. Is that the wrong? Is it this one? So that's from the JSON lecture. This is how we get a specific value out of a JS value, which is a JS object using polymorphism. It is an object, so this is going to call the object method that does this, not the JS value method of that abstract class. So, and then we convert it to the type that we expect. We expect that to be a string for the username. And let me store this in a variable. The to username of type string, And just to get my types in here, this is a JS value. It wasn't imported, was the error. I had to import it. So now I have JS value and JSON imported up here. But I use my keyboard shortcuts to get there. So now, and of course, let's do the same exact thing to get the message. Get the message out of this JSON object as well. Now we're kind of stuck. We know at some point we want to val socket of type socket IO client socket dot emit mixing things up. Send event. We want to send an event of type DM of this format where we know. Actually, let's build part of it. Let's get some more JSON out of the way as we go here. So we're going to need. Let's see how I want to. I get this question quite a bit, so I got to think of what way I want to do this. I think I'm going to put all the values in a map and then turn the map into a JSON string. If the recipient username is not registered, for this lecture question, you can assume that they're registered. I'm only going to test it with registered usernames. If we were building this and deploying it out there in the real world, we would want to check to make sure that they had registered so we don't get errors in our server crashing. This code is for you to copy. This is part of the incentives for filling out the course evals. And as a general rule, I didn't advertise this as much as I usually do this semester, but any code that I provide is fair game for you to use. You can use it in any submissions, at least inside 116. You can use it for anything. I also allow you to use it outside of 116, but if you're using it in a different class, you have to check with that instructor whether that's okay or not. But you're free to use any code that I provide in any of your submissions. That's the only source that you can just blatantly copy is me. Because I'm just careful not to leak solutions except when I'm explicitly doing it here. But if you want to just, you're right, yeah, it won't be academic integrity. So if this exact code shows up in your submission for this lecture question, I expect that because, I'm giving you the code. I'm giving you the solution. What's the point in you just modifying it a little bit to make it yours? You still have to type it up because you're not going to be able to cut and paste from a video. So you're still getting some exercise there. But, yeah, you can use this code. That's part of the incentive, that I spoil the question. I just give you the answer. So I want some, I don't know what to call this, JS map. I'm just going to call it map because I can't think of a more creative name. But I want a map for that I'm going to build my JSON string that I'm going to send over the server. And I'm going to build this as a map of strings. What I recommend, at least what I like to do, what I prefer, is build a map of strings because in JSON, all of our keys and our JSON objects are always going to be strings. So I can create a map of string to JS value like we saw in the original lecture. This is where we first learned about polymorphism. JS value could be a JS string, a JS number, a JS object, a JS array, JS null. Could be any one of the JSON types, but we're going to use polymorphism to store any of those types in a JS value to be able to get our one map with mixed values. Now in this case, we only have strings, so it could be string to string. But in general, that's what we want to do. Especially for clicker, you would want a map of strings to JS values to represent your JSON objects. So let's create this map. We need keys we need keys from, mapping to some string, and we need a key message mapping to the message. Now, the message we already have. That's easy enough. Missing my close parent. Right? No. Are you giving me a message? Oh, right. JSON dot is it stringify? I thought it was stringify. It is stringify. IntelliJ just didn't want to tell me it was stringify. No. To JSON. Stringify is the last one. All right. Sorry about that. Just using my memory here. JSON dot. It's a little slow sometimes. My brain catches up to what I'm trying to do. So I need to convert these strings into JS values, and I'm going to do that by using the JSON library, this play library that we're using, called toJSON, and that converts these strings into JS strings, which I can store as JS values through polymorphism. So we don't know what goes here yet. It needs to be the username that sent this message, but we do have the message, and then when we have this map, we can say JSON dot to JSON of the entire map, and finally convert that JS value into a string, which is where I was getting ahead of myself, but that's where we use stringify. So we have most of this set up, but we need to know what to put here, and we need to know how to get this socket. So we need to know which socket we need to send this DM to, and what username this user is that sent us the socket. So some socket, this client here, sent us a DM to send to some user, but we don't have the username of this socket, the username associated with this socket, and we don't have the socket associated to this username. So we need to go from username to socket and socket to username, and that's when our register listener is going to come in here. So we're going to have to make some changes to be able to remember which username is associated with which socket and which socket is associated with what username. And the only time we have both of those pieces of information together is when a user registers. So when they register, when each user registers with this register message, we have their socket, we have their username. So let's use some good old-fashioned data structures to be able to remember those users. I like to do this with two data structures. It does duplicate data. There are other ways you could do this, but I think this is the simplest way, is to use two maps, username to socket, which is a map. I'll put my types here as well. A map of string to socket.io client. Actually, I have to do my types here because they can't be inferred. And a data structure socket to username of type socket to string. And when somebody registers, I'm going to populate both these data structures with their information. So I want to say username, username to socket, which I won't have access to. Username to socket plus equals username to client, and socket to username client to username. And now with those data structures populated, which doesn't work yet, I'll get to that, doesn't work yet, now we can say from username equals, from username equals socket to username, and this is where we're going to leverage the fact that we're assuming that everyone has registered properly. Socket to username of this to username. That's going to go right here. And then username to socket of the to username. So this is going to give us, since we have the, I'm doing this wrong. This is supposed to be client. Sorry about that. The socket that sent me this DM, that's the person who's sending the DM. So the from username, who this message is from, I'm going to take that socket, the reference to the socket, and get their username from this database where I remembered that, hey, this socket is associated with this username. So I'm going to pull that out of my map to be able to get that from username. Similarly, I'm sending this to a specific user by username. So I need my username to socket data structure, give it that username, and get their socket so I know who to send this thing to. So this is the idea of what we want to do. There's just one last piece of the puzzle that we need, is we don't have access to these data structures because they're part of the DM server. So what I can do is from the DM server, when I'm creating these listeners, I'm going to pass a reference of itself, the DM server that's running, pass a reference of the server to the listener. Now we could also pass references of the maps separately. I like to send the whole server just because then I have everything. And if I want to add more variables here, I'm still just sending everything. So they have access to everything. So, and then the DM server, or the DM listener, send the whole server. Then we have access to all the data that's here. We add that to the constructor. We have an instance, a reference to a DM server. And we can access its state variables through that reference. Reassignment to veil. Those need to be vars. And now we have our DM server. Export to zip file. Let's throw that in downloads. And we should be able to check if I did everything right. Let me submit this and then I'll catch up on some chat here. I won't have, so you can send me, the best way to contact me, Nash, is through email right now. I don't plan to have more office hours. I was planning on having a review session today, but we didn't hit 80% response, so hey, I don't have to do that. But sending me an email is the best way to get in contact with me. And anyone who hasn't completed the learning objectives, actually everybody, I'm going to send at least one more email about learning objectives. Either a confirmation that you've passed them all, or you're close to passing them all. Here's what you can do to still pass the course. Or congratulations, you failed because you didn't even come close. You didn't try. You'll get one of those 3 emails from me. Hopefully tomorrow. Hopefully I can process everything quickly. But yeah, email is the best way to contact me. And then if it calls for a meeting, we can do it that way. For some reason my types aren't turning to green when I type veil message string. If all stays white, will that create a functionality problem? I'm not sure what you mean. Do I have green? Oh, if they're not green, you could just have different settings, but if it's not green, you probably don't have type parameters. Make sure you're using the type parameters properly. Oh yeah, and you have to. Oh, everything's white. If everything's white, you need to right click SRC. I'm on the wrong window. You would have to right click SRC, and you can't see the drop downs, but there's an option towards the bottom to mark it as root. Mark it as the source's root. And here's where we pray, please give me credit, please give me credit. Hey, I got credit. So I get the 1.0, one shot. I one shot the thing twice. Hopefully I can do that because, I'm teaching the dang course. Let's put the code back on screen for those of you who have questions about the code still. Let's try to get all the important bits on screen here. No, that doesn't get the data structures. What is the JSON import? So since I'm using the JSON play library, which is in our POM, so we're installing this library, we need to import it whenever we're using parts of that library. So these JS values, the JSON, I think that's the only two classes we use here. So we need to import them from that library to be able to use them. Would you be doing alarm actor today? No. I made my incentives quite clear. Hopefully, at least you filled out. If you're asking that, hopefully you filled out the course evals. But not enough of the class did to go over more than this. I made my incentives clear. Like, if you want something from me, hey, I want something from you too. We can negotiate here. We hit 60%, so I went over this one. But no, I'm not going to take more requests. I might go look at the slide and give you brief hints. Maybe I can do that later once we're done with this one. But I mean, the people have spoken and they didn't say alarm actor. This is the one that was voted on. Was alarm actor even... When was that? 5-3? Was it? Yeah, 5-3. It did get 5 votes. That would have been, if we hit 90%, I would have been going over that today. It was 3rd place. 5-3. Did that even hit? I don't even remember seeing that in review week. The review week post, though. If you want something, you got to tell me through the avenues that I put forth. Alarm clock. Yeah, I got 3 votes in that, which pales to the other ones. Please scroll down to DM listener. Oh, I didn't realize I scrolled up. Oh, because I scrolled up to the imports. Yeah, you still have makeup interviews. And anyone, if an interview is the only thing preventing you from passing the class, then you're definitely going to get more makeup opportunities with me next week. For those of you for whom that applies over the weekend, I'll send another Calendly so you can sign up for interviews. Since I won't have any lectures next week, pretty much my entire schedule is devoted to interviews. I'm going to have boatloads of times available. I'm going to make sure everybody has a time slot that works for them. My next week is pretty much processing final grades and doing interviews. So don't you worry, we're going to get you time slots. We're going to get you a time to interview. And yes, you do get more makeup opportunities. Some of you only had one opportunity for LO5 so far. So if you didn't get that one, you're going to be with me next week. Is there any viable alternative to JSON? JSON's definitely the most popular option. There are a few other ones. YAML is a contender if you want to check out that formatting. XML does the same thing, but I don't know. I personally don't like XML, but if you like that better than JSON, go for it. JSON is kind of a fact of life if you're doing anything web-based. You're going to be working with JSON. Because personally, in my opinion, I think JSON is the best format that solves that problem of representing really any piece of data you have with any different structure, especially with nested data structures. It solves that problem just like many other things, but JSON is kind of the winner, and I think rightfully so. I think it's a great format. But if you don't like it, check out the other formats, but you probably will have to deal with JSON. Now, JSON is a lot more of a pain in a strongly typed language like Scala or Java than it is in a loosely typed language like JavaScript or Python. So that might be why it's leaving a bad taste in your mouth when you have to do all this crap. This is kind of painful, and I'll readily admit that. But if you want your code in your strongly typed language to interact with the internet, that's what you got to do. For a lot of people, the solution is, including myself when I'm writing web servers, is to just not use Scala or Java. I don't write web apps in Scala, for example, except for this course. I'll use Python usually for my web apps, and that's part of it. It makes JSON so much simpler. Yeah. Oh, yeah. So tried and failed. If we do hit 80%, I'll still be watching that. If we hit it before midnight, I'll go live. I'll make a post on Piazza and go live and start a review session. So that's not expired yet. And I will go, if we do hit 80%, I'll start a review session and then start it with the second most voted lecture question. So I'll spoil, I think it's 4-6. I'll go live and spoil 4-6 on that stream and then take questions until midnight. That's what I was planning to do. I was going to do the review session 8 to midnight. I was going to do a 4-hour marathon and just take questions from chat and just talk about lecture questions that whole time. And I thought apparently I'm not too naive, but I thought we would have hit 80% with those incentives. But apparently the incentives either weren't strong enough or a good percentage, 35% of the class is just completely not paying attention, which is certainly possible. Yeah, we're sitting at 65 still. Can we go over 1-1? Yeah, just watch the lecture video for 1-2. I already spoiled 1-1 way long ago. In week 2, Wednesday of week 2, lecture 5. I already spoiled 1-1. I'm sure you're joking, but I actually did spoil that one a long time ago. Anyone without credit for 1-1, I know you haven't even watched up to lecture 5, and that's just, come on. Like, what are you doing? Are you even trying? I also spoiled some other lecture questions that some students don't have credit for yet. There's really no excuse for that. What are your thoughts on how the class did overall? Not great. I got to be honest, man. This was a rough semester, and part of what I just alluded to is there's a good portion of the class that I just don't have any contact with. Like it's easier to skip lectures when it's online. And I think a lot of students fell into that trap where they just started skipping lectures, fell off the face of the earth, never responded to any of my emails. Several times throughout the semester, I would send emails to anyone who was far behind and just said, "Hey, what's going on? What do you need? What's happening here?" And I had my TAs do likewise. They would all have a group of students that they were assigned to kind of watch their progress throughout the course, and I had them email those struggling students as well. And a lot of them just never responded to anything. So that really hit the semester hard, the class hard, in terms of failure rates. I had a lot of students resign, whom me and the TAs just never were able to get a single response out of, not a single response to our emails, no submissions in Autolab, nothing at all. And I just don't even know what happened to those students. Maybe they had Wi-Fi issues and just couldn't get internet access, but I just don't know. So that made the semester kind of crappy. For those of you who have been around and have been hanging out in streams, I think the course went pretty well for that. Anyone who's interested in learning computer science, I still think the course was delivered well. The online structure, the online format, I don't think has hindered my ability to deliver these lectures. And in fact, I think it actually enhanced it because I have chat to interact with. When I give these lectures in a lecture hall, Nobody says a word except maybe like one student, which is tough because to ask a question, you have to shut down lecture. And that's, I can understand why you're hesitant to do that. And then all eyes are on you. It's stressful. But if you can just type a message in chat, I get a lot more interaction. If you passed all the learning objectives in AutoGrader, yeah, you're good to go. If you have verification for all 5 of them, you're done with learning objectives. Yeah, I'll give a hint for 5.3. I'm just saying that I won't spoil it. Like, I won't go through the code like this. Man, 2:30 already? That did take me a decent amount of time to solve this. Do this live. I was actually gonna do a GUI for the DM server too. I think I can skip that. In the interest of time. But I did get a question. I'll just go over it quick. I did get a question in office hours, which is legitimate. I think I'll change some things for next semester based on this. Is how are you expected to test the DM server without just submitting to AutoLab? And my answer is to take the chat GUI, the GUI that we had for that, and modify it to work with the DM server. So actually have it send messages of type direct message and react to messages of type DM, and have an extra field for the username that you're going to send the DM to, and then receive those messages, parse the JSON, and build the front end for that DM server. I think next semester I'll just give you the DM server front end as part of the lecture question handout. But if I reuse that lecture question. But in general, I'll just give you the clients for each web server that I expect you to write, so you can make sure that everything's working right. So I wanted to show off the whole process of modifying that GUI, but in the interest of time, 5.3. So the tricky part of this one is getting that delay. Which I think I have one slide in here. Doing this part. And I've had this question a bit in office hours. Make sure you're using this syntax directly. Do it exactly like I did in lecture, exactly like I do in the slides. I see a lot of students trying a lot of different things that won't necessarily work, or maybe could work, but you really have to understand how this library works and what these values are, what this dot milliseconds does, and everything. If you make sure you have your I don't have my imports. Make sure you have your imports. So go to this traffic example would probably be the easiest way. I mentioned it in lecture if you watch the video as well. But go to the... and make sure that you have your imports, specifically this one, the Scala concurrent duration underscore. Make sure you have this import at the top of your file, and make sure you have this import context dispatcher inside your class. With those two imports, when you do these delays, when you say schedule once, whatever the time interval is in milliseconds, and I see this one does work. If you want to change this to seconds, if you can spell better than I can, you can just do this as seconds. Since for that lecture question, we get the value in seconds. Or you can do millis if you don't feel like typing milliseconds, like I didn't feel like typing right there. But use this exact syntax, and you'll be able to get those messages sent on a delay. When you're doing the testing for that one, make sure you do your delay as well. Make sure you're expecting that message to come in at the time you expect. So when you say you schedule something, to schedule the alarm to go off in 1 second, I would have an expect no message in there for 800 milliseconds. Wait 0.8 of a second, for example, and then expect the message for 400 milliseconds to make sure you're getting it in this window that you expect, and then expect no message after that to make sure that the delay worked properly, because you have to test that delay. So you got to play with your timing methods and make sure you are receiving that message when you expect it to be received. Don't just say set the alarm and then expect a message. Set an alarm for 5 seconds and expect a message with a time limit of 6 seconds. That's not going to pass all my testing. You got to make sure you have an expect no message and then expect a message, and play with time the way we expect. Live Cyberpunk. If we hit 90%, I definitely would have. I think I'll just play it offline. How frequent will you reply to email? Right now, pretty frequently. During the semester, I got pretty far behind. Right now, I'm at the bottom of my inbox. So right now, you'll get pretty quick responses. I'm working in overdrive right now, trying to close out the semester, so I'll be on top of it. Within a day, probably. Still, depending on timing and when you send it. I might not get it to it immediately, but within a day. Can't believe so many people won't fill out a 3-minute form. I know. I don't know what to think of this. I think some students just don't even check email. I think that's what we're dealing with. And I just, it's frustrating because I just don't even know what to do with those students. Like, why are they wasting their money to be here if they're not going to do anything? Maybe some of them have good reason, but it's shocking that in current year, I don't know, to be that disconnected. When can we expect our expansion and project contribution grades? Project contribution, I'm not sure. I'll probably get to it Monday. I'll start grading those, I would guess. After the deadline, I'll just process them all. The expansion objectives, some of the TAs are going to start processing those this weekend. They're going to be going through those and getting your grades. So you can start seeing results for that. But we're going to grade the expansions on a rolling basis whenever one of us finds some time to do some grading, we're going to do that. I probably won't be able to jump in on expansion grading or project contribution grading until at least Monday, because this weekend I'll be processing all the learning objective stuff. After the lecture question deadline, finalize all the lecture question stuff, start sending out emails of what people need to do in finals week, send out my schedule and all that. So I have a lot on my plate already this weekend. But the TAs will start those this weekend. They'll get a good chunk of it done, I would assume. Yeah, maybe we can, if we get to 90 plus over the weekend, yeah, my incentive will still hold. Can we go over 0-1, 0-2? What's the criteria for having an interview for the expansions? It's case-by-case basis, but if you're on top of everything, like if you have one of the main criteria, I will tell the criteria, but all the decisions will be made case by case. One of the big criteria is how many of the homeworks you've completed. So if you've already done, for example, all of the homeworks and interviewed for all of them and passed all that, we don't see the need to put you through another interview. But if you haven't had, on the other extreme, if you don't have any homeworks done and you didn't do any interviews and you never had an application objective interview, we want to make sure you get that experience at least once of going through one of those interviews. So it's a question of how much value do I think the student will get out of that experience. And I do mean that the interviews, one of the big benefits of those is that you get practice with interviewing. So when you have that first internship or full-time offer interview, that it should be a bit less stressful because we've already put you through these stressful interview situations before. So I want to make sure you get at least that interview experience for one application objective, because they are a different style of interviews than the learning objective interviews. Do the evals separate still in and drop? Yes. Yeah, anyone who resigned or dropped the course is not in that calculation, because that would be we'd be at 100. If it was 65% of the entire original roster, we would be at 100%. So it's 65% of everyone who's left. And a certain percentage of that, pretty low percentage, are students who seem pretty resigned to fail. They haven't submitted anything, but for some reason haven't resigned. So I wouldn't expect to see them respond. But anyone else who's still in the class and expecting to pass and working to pass still, I'm surprised they haven't. I don't have good answers for you. Maybe I'll send another email today. I don't know, to get the stream. Yeah, maybe I'll send an email. Anyone working on lecture questions. Maybe they're just so busy working on lecture questions that they haven't checked their email, to be honest. It could be. You finished all the graded LQs, but not 02. Yeah, the secret of 01 and 02 are they don't count for anything. I don't advertise that at the time because you really need to get some practice with submitting to Autolab and all that. But yeah, you'll be fine, creature.